at this point in my life. I also want to be able to help other people kind of understand where I'm at. I want to have this video for the future so that I can look back at this time in my life, because this time in my life is very unclear and uncertain, and it kind of just feels like a record of kind of the things that I was going through during this time. And I think this will help me to kind of be able to look at things with perspective down the road going forward. I wasn't always one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Up until I was 11, I celebrated my birthday, I celebrated Christmas, all the other holidays. I played rated M video games. I played soccer at the YMCA. Just heathen activities. But, these were normal things for an 11-year-old, that's not a witness. But soon, most of those things would start to change. My mom had been one of Jehovah's Witnesses and had been inactive for about 25 years. I've always really loved my mom, and she felt like the one stable connection I had growing up. So when my mom wanted me to start going to meetings, I wanted to make her happy, and I wanted to be able to do something that I felt she would appreciate. The more I started going to meetings and the more I started participating and commenting, the more positive reinforcement I was getting from others in the congregation, and, most importantly from my mom, which, positive reinforcement that at that age, I was really craving, because I think that's what I needed. Funny enough, my mom tells me that when I first started attending meetings, I told her that I don't think that these are my kind of people, because I didn't really enjoy it. The thing that kind of drew my interest was this idea of Bible prophecy. Bible prophecy was something that I did find interesting, and it was, what gave me any sort of faith that the Bible could be true. I believed, even before I was a witness, that the world would soon end, because this was right before 2012. I believed maybe there was something to the world ending in 2012. I mean, they made a movie about it. So, that's all the evidence I needed. But then, I'm being told through my Bible study that, yeah, the world is going to end, and it's going to end soon. And here's the evidence found in the Bible for that. My little conspiratorial 11-year-old brain was like, I knew it. Like, my mind was blown. So I latched onto this idea that these were the last days and that the end was soon to come. And so I started making changes. I got rid of all of my video games. I stopped celebrating the holidays. I stopped associating with people that I considered friends, but the organization considered bad association. Even if they are good people, they're not Jehovah's Witnesses. So I had to slowly start weeding these people and cutting them out of my life. And I didn't really know how to explain that to people without telling them that they were bad association. And so, I was making these life changes, and I was, being encouraged and, told I was doing a good thing by doing them. I felt like it was the right thing to do. Here I was, leaving this world that I'd grown up in behind, leaving these friendships that, I had made. And I was now becoming a Jehovah's Witness. I started speaking like a witness. I started dressing like a witness. Did my best to just hang out with other witnesses. So I see like I was slowly starting to assimilate into this JW culture. And I didn't know it at the time, but this was how my indoctrination began. I was slowly absorbing this message that the world was controlled by Satan and the world was a bad and dangerous place, and the only safety was in Jehovah's organization. I started to believe that. And because of that, I started to become a more anxious person, a more anxious child. I went to public school, so I was anxious being there. I feared getting too close to other students and people that like I wanted to be friends with, and I felt a lot of guilt, and I felt a lot of shame, having fun and like wanting to get close to people at school. Even though I enjoyed spending time with them and I felt like they were good people, I felt this layer of guilt for enjoying the company of these people that I wasn't supposed to really get close with. Once I graduated, I realized that I can leave all that behind. I don't have to feel this guilt that I do every day being at school. Once I graduate, I can just fully immerse myself in doing Jehovah's will. Yeah, that's what I did. I fully immersed myself in this world. After high school, I started pioneering. I was putting in 70 hours a month in the pioneer work. I became a ministerial servant. I was giving talks and parts at the meeting, and I always had something to do at the meeting. I was also doing remote Bethel work. I was working with the public information desk, assisting with like photo projects, video projects, and I was also volunteering in construction work too. So, I had become fully immersed in this world. And so this was all happening leading up to 2019. And then, of course, in 2020, COVID hits.
More than 3 billion people in almost 70 countries and territories have been asked to stay at home.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
We're asking everyone to work at home if possible, postpone unnecessary travel.
This busy schedule that I had created inside the organization quickly came to a halt. And suddenly I had all this time on my hands that I hadn't had for years. It allowed, me to be able to ponder things about my own life and about what I was doing for myself. But also, during this time, I was able to start asking myself questions, questions that I had but had never really considered, in depth. Questions like, did the flood happen? Like, did the flood literally happen? Was there a Garden of Eden? Was Adam and Eve the first humans? Like, what do I make of evolution or, archaeological evidence suggesting that humans have been around for more than 6,000 years? Just a lot of questions that I was kind of afraid to really look into. And I had a lot of other questions, but I was scared to ask them because, I thought that this line of questioning would lead me down a wrong path, and I kept all this stuff to myself. Also during COVID, I got really into I became fascinated with like sociology and how during the pandemic there was a rise of kind of crazy thinking, whether it was like politically or whether it was about the pandemic. This is what it is.
Excuse me, anyone ever told you the earth is flat?
Chemtrails, 9/11.
Did you know they made up dinosaurs?
I completely solved the JFK assassination, which I'll share with you at a different day.
There was kind of just this rise of almost like cult-like following or groups that just kind of sprung up. And I found this really interesting. And I wanted to know like how people can come to conclusions that are so far from reality. And the more research I did on that, the more parallels I started to see with my own thinking and my own religious beliefs. I started to learn about things like confirmation bias and how the brain prefers information that confirms what it already believes and rejects information that it doesn't. And, I saw this happening in the way that we taught things from the Bible and the way that we understood science and history.
If I have a belief or an attitude, I will search for instances that confirm what I believe. And also, I find myself in a company with a lot of other people who think the same way as I do.
You start at point A, and then you do some kind of process of collecting evidence, of thinking, or whatever you want, and you end up at a conclusion, point B, that you believe is true. Okay? Science is the arrow. That's all science is the arrow. Science is a process to get to conclusions. But there's a whole other way to think, which is that you start at B. You start at the conclusion, and you say, I have to find evidence that shows that this is true.
You're not looking for data to try to prove you wrong or refine your position, right? You're trying to look for all the data that proves you right.
You'll cherry pick until you find evidence that appears to be an arrow, a logical arrow to your dogma.
And then, I started seeing a lot of parallels between my religion and other religions that were considered cults. And then I remember listening while I was at work to a podcast by Stuff You Should Know, and it was on how cults work. And I remember listening to that podcast just I felt so uncomfortable. I didn't want to admit that the things I was hearing in this podcast were things that my group did.
There's some other, I guess, kind of giveaways that become less and less apparent the more immersed you become. And that would be deception in recruiting, right?
Yeah.
Thought reform techniques.
Good outside is bad. Whoever's on the inside is good.
Right.
That's a huge hallmark.
There's like a real us and them, a clear divide between us and them.
Very much.
Which can lead to a lot of feelings of persecution, paranoia, and generally an idea that, or that's, I guess, generally supported by the idea that since most destructive cults are religious in nature, that the in-group, the cult, is saved, and everybody outside, the bad people, are all damned to hell.
Right.
I think a part of me knew that I couldn't admit that to myself, so I just kind of had to bury those feelings. That's the thing. Life kept moving, and the deeper we got into the pandemic, the more things started opening back up. And then in 2021, I got married. We started going back to meetings. We started going back out in field service. And so, I had this kind of distraction again. So fast forward to about January 2024, and I'm assigned to give my first public talk. I chose the outline. I think it was something like Jehovah reveals his qualities to his creation. So, I was given, the simple task of just proving that God exists in 30 minutes, which seemed like a much easier task when I was, mentally in than it does now. But as you might imagine, I found this very difficult. I had the outline. I found that the information presented in the outline honestly didn't really convince me. So I realized I wanted supplemental information that was going to, kind of build my faith in this claim. So as I'm doing research, I'm realizing that I'm kind of doing what I knew was confirmation bias. I was kind of just cherry picking information that supported my claim while ignoring information that didn't. And this bothered me. I felt that the evidence that I was presenting wasn't the full story, and I didn't feel like it was all that strong. I realized I wasn't convinced myself, and I struggled with this. I just needed to believe all of this information so that I could get through the talk, and so that's what I did. I just kind of pushed through it, but still something in me didn't feel good about it. It felt like it was intellectually dishonest, and honestly, I didn't feel like my argument was really that strong. I realized that I had to give this talk, so I'm once again just going to push these feelings down, and I'm just going to carry on with the talk and do the best I can. And I did. I gave the talk, but the whole time I was giving it, I couldn't help but feel that I was deceiving my audience. And it made me think, I I don't think like I believe this. And then the part that was even scarier was knowing that there was information that was out there that existed that I wasn't allowed to look at. I mean, there's a phenomenon known as the Streisand effect, where the more you try to discourage people from looking at information, the more it's going to motivate them to actually look at that information. So that was a struggle, knowing that I'm having these doubts and that there's information that might confirm the doubts that I have. And it was around this time that I was having these feelings. I was recommended a video by someone on YouTube named Johnny Harris, and it was entitled "Why I Left the Mormon Church." And I found this really interesting because, you know, I kind of considered Mormons to be like Jehovah's Witness weird cousins, because, you know, I saw a lot of overlap with their religion and ours, and I mean, just the fact that they go door to door just like we do. You know, this video really got my attention, but I was extremely nervous to even watch it because I didn't know what kind of effect it would have on me. I kind of talked myself into it, and I figured, well, it's not my religion, so it's fine. As I'm watching this video, I'm finding myself like really resonating with the points that he's making. Like I was asking the same questions about my own religion that he was asking about his.
I'd grown up with this firm conviction of the LDS doctrine and its beliefs about the world, which are very specific and very peculiar. And I really started to question, is this what I want to teach my son? And so I spent an entire year reading the Book of Mormon, going to church. I had a responsibility at church that I was putting a lot of work into, and praying every morning and every night for some sort of conviction. I said, I am more earnest and sincere than I've ever been about this. I'm willing to listen to any answer. I just need an answer. I spent a year doing this. A year. It's a long time. And then I remember this day, I was biking into Washington, D.C. On a sunny, spring day, and it just hit me in some really strong way that, no, this isn't working. I've put in the years of asking and the effort towards making this work, and it wasn't working. This isn't true for me.
And he was coming to conclusions that I was afraid to come to. At the same time, I felt like I wasn't crazy. Like I wasn't alone in feeling like things were off. That night I gave myself the permission to actually do the research that I wasn't allowed to do. And after a week of serious research, fact-checking, cross-referencing, doing all of this intense research, I realized that my faith in the organization that I belonged to was gone. Then once I uncovered the history of failed prophecy that had been covered over, doctrines that didn't have any basis in the Bible, organizational history that had kind of been whitewashed and just tossed aside, so much information that I had no idea even existed. Once I found all of that information, I felt lied to. I felt betrayed and angry and scared. But at the same time, I was almost relieved because I felt like my intuition had been right for so many years, that there was something off, and something inside me knew that. At this point, I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. I still had to attend meetings. I still had to go in service. I was still pioneering. We had Pioneer School coming up that summer. So I still had all these responsibilities that I had to go through with, all while not believing it anymore. So I just did what I always did. I went to the meetings. I struggled through those. I went out in service up until the point where I think I basically was just having a panic attack in the car, because I couldn't get out of the car and go door to door and talk to people about something I didn't believe in. So I think I got mentally worn down, and by October, I just couldn't do it anymore. I just, I stopped everything. I stopped going to meetings, I stopped going in service, I just couldn't do it. And of course, that doesn't go unnoticed when you're, pretty active in the congregation. So, this eventually led to some conversations with the elders, and I, just told them everything. I had basically gotten to the point where I don't even believe in God. I don't believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God. Everything was gone. That's kind of where I've gotten to so far. And that's why I want to make this video, because, there are a lot of people that don't know what's going on and don't know where I'm at. And I care about those people, and I want them to be informed, and I want them to know, my thoughts and feelings. I also realized that me saying this and making is going to hurt a lot of people. And it's going to isolate a lot of people from me. And, I don't want to live my life as a hypocrite. I don't want to pretend to be someone I'm not. But I just want to make it clear that I was never wronged by anybody in the organization. I don't have any personal vendettas against anybody. It's just the organization, for what it stands for, I don't believe is true, and I don't support a lot of the practices that it does. And, for a multitude of reasons, I'm deciding to step away. And I welcome anybody who, wants to ask me further questions. I'm perfectly fine with answering those questions. And if there's anybody in a similar situation as me, I hope that I can help you, and just let you know that you are also not crazy, because I thought I was, for a while, and this process has been really hard and lonely, but, just want to let people know that if you're in a similar situation, you're not alone. But yeah, that's about it.